Ladies and gentlemen, happy Monday. I'm wearing this spiffy shirt because I just had a job interview, not wearing my typical VideoLife shirt. By the way, if you would like a VideoLife shirt, merch link is in the description. Today we're going to be talking about, is World War III about to start? According to our friend What If Alt History, our favorite Turkish Empire, demographics, American dominance, Europe falling apart, very similar themes across his videos. So I have a feeling that these themes are going to come up, and it's going to be talking about obviously the Ukrainian crisis, and yeah, so a little different from our typical Canadian World War II content. But I like this guy's videos, so I figured might as well. So without further ado, let's get right into it. It never works. I do that every time.
Ever since the Ukraine crisis, people have been asking me what the chances are that this war escalates into something bigger. The world's been stuck in a fever pitch of worrying if the war to end all wars will happen in our time.
And that's what they said about World War I.
This video will be a breakdown
world
of
to end all wars.
what are the chances that we could get the next world war. If a war were to break out as well, how bad would it get? The answers may unalterably change our lives.
Of course. I mean, the threat of nuclear war in the modern times is so much more devastating than it was, considering the technology we have now. So, is there going to be an ad coming up
Hi,
now?
I'm Rudyard, the guy behind Whatifalthist, and one thing that doesn't change is our need for comfort and space. In practical use,
He kind of looks like me
we've
with a
always
goatee.
had. That's why this video is sponsored by Extra, the world's largest smart wallet company.
All
Extra
right. I predicted the ad. Okay, so let's skip ahead a little bit. I'm surprised. He actually, I don't know, me with a goatee. Do you guys see it? White guy with glasses, we're certainly a type. All right.
Given that this is a politics and history channel, I've covered the potential for future wars in great detail in other videos.
So I think that's one thing too, is that I need to watch some of his other videos because there seem to be some general themes. But
I'm just going to briefly summarize the factors I've talked about before here to create a picture of what could be driving the world towards war. The best way to describe it is that the world is in a constant struggle between the world as it really exists and the institutions humans make to manage it. The problem we run into is that the institutions we use to manage our world were largely created at the end of World War II, while the world we live in has changed a tremendous amount since then.
Yeah,
wars are natural to human history and the world order. You can repress them and the necessary changes to the world order that come with them, but they have to come out at some point. The easiest trend to look at, and the one I've talked about the most ad nauseum before on this show, but only since it's the most pertinent factor in world today, is that due to globalization, we're seeing a remarkable amount of competition over the world order that's gradually breaking it. There's a reason that there are riots and dissatisfaction in France, India, China, America, or Canada now. The underlying world system isn't working for anyone.
Wait, riots in Canada? Okay, which I don't know what riots he's... Maybe he's talking about the trucker convoy, but okay.
Anymore. The shortest explanation is that American or French workers are being undercut by Bulgarians and
demographics. Our boy demographics.
Or undercut by Indonesians and Bangladeshis. The world's population has exploded by a factor of 4 since World War II, and the amount of areas competing in the globalized economy means that everyone everywhere is on their toes trying to survive, being potentially undercut by someone else.
I'm very curious what he thinks about the theory of world population actually declining around 2050. And this is just off the top of my head, so please, I might get the exact source incorrect. But there's a Swedish social scientist, and his prediction is that by 2050, we're actually going to see the highest amount of demographics, of world population, and then it'll start to slide down. This is due to factors such as education rising in the developing world, in the developed world, obviously also starting to have less kids, right? I think in Canada, you need a replacement rate of roughly 2.1, and I believe in Canada it's currently 1.4 to 1.7, right? So Canada actually requires immigration to sustain its population. But I'd be curious if he's ever touched on this sort of theory, because I think it makes a lot of sense that, to say there's too many people, it's going to be overpopulated. People were saying this in the 1970s. They were saying this even before then too, that we're going to reach a point of overpopulation. But I don't know. I'm very curious of your kind of opinion of the demographics argument that he presents a lot in his videos. So let me know in the comments.
The whole world system's in a rat race to the bottom. Nations become aggressive as their societies fall apart and become desperate. This isn't new across history. You can actually look at a series of over a dozen metrics that you can use to predict crises like this that have occurred over history. The last examples being the French Revolution, the crisis of the 17th century, and the Black Death. All the metrics line up for today. This means that the chances are extremely high we see a crisis that breaks across the world system in the decades to come. In all the previous crises, we've seen wars between the great powers, whether the Napoleonic, 30 Years' War, and 100 Years' War. However, a couple things are also making the war more worrying in the years to come. I've covered these factors in my Wars of the 2020s and 30s video. The first is water wars. The world is getting drier due to global warming, and lots of areas with declining water systems at the same time as coming off an era of massive population growth. Nations are trying to grab water for geostrategic reasons, with Turkey damming up rivers flowing into Iraq, China, the rivers flowing that make up 20% of India's water supply, and similar problems in Central Asia. For a lot of countries involved, the water is necessary for their survival as nations. India, a nation with a restless and overpopulated farmer population, is already struggling with water as is, and is the area I'm most worried about. The third...
The water wars. There was a game about this, actually. Okay, all right. I don't exactly know how to comment on that, but it seems like due to globalization, I mean, there's always ways to secure more natural resources. For example, Canada has some of the most freshwater supply in the world, and so to say that this will break down into nation-to-nation crises, I don't know. It seems a little
factor is
far-fetched.
aging, in which populations are collapsing around the world due to low birth rates. China, Germany, Japan, and Russia's populations are projected to halve over the next 70 years. The effects are worse of anywhere in Eastern Europe. Aging of this degree is unprecedented and will murder nations' economies as the elderly take up more money to support them, which leaves decreasing amounts of young with less and less. This creates a death spiral. The reason Russia and China are being so aggressive right now is to rage against the dying light before their societies fall apart due to aging. Finally, the balance of power and social systems that were created at the end of the Second World War, whether the American guarantorship of the world order, the US dollar hegemony, the managerial bureaucratic economic system, the technocratic social order, the United Nations, and in much of the Third World, the nation itself, cannot survive the pressures that a new world is putting upon them. We're seeing old orders fray and be crushed under the weight of the new world order.
Why, though?
The best example of this is China's threatening of America as the dominant world power, which creates the condition called Thucydides' trap, where America is incentivized to crush China before China becomes more powerful than America. The historian...
And that's just something I just don't agree with. I mean, there's some of the wars that he uses here as an example were wars that happened... Right. And even then, the Soviet Union and the United States, right, you can see with the invention of nuclear weapons, right, past this point, there's been nothing, right? There was political influence and everything like this. But I mean, the idea of war between China and the United States, I think that's about as far-fetched as it could possibly be. And if we ever get to that point, I mean, it's over anyways. I mean, how long does it take to launch a nuclear missile from Washington to Beijing or Beijing to Washington, right? At that point, I think the whole world's fucked anyways. So, I don't know. To say that it's inevitable, then, okay.
America is incentivized to crush China.
Again, incentivized, I don't think so.
Before China becomes more powerful than America. The historian Barbara Tuchman described the world before World War I as buzzing with chaotic energy that led to war due to industrialization being so destabilizing, and I think we see the same energy now, with the massive pain caused by the rise of the internet, which whips societies into a frenzy where stuff like canceling and mass hatred's okay. I think it's very telling how a majority of chattering class Americans support a U.S. war over Ukraine since they've been so riled up by mob mentality. It's almost like the mass frenzy that took place before World War I. Industrial wars are so...
Okay, again, I also don't agree with that either. I mean, before World War I, there were a lot more economic issues as well, right? Plaguing both classes of people, right? And to say modernly that is the same case, and over Ukraine and how many Americans, right, would be the first question. But to compare that to World War I, pre-World War I, the different economic conditions, I mean, the fact is the world is more at peace now than it's ever been, right? The world is richer than it's ever been. We've halved world poverty since 1990. And so to say that everything is as bad as it was pre-World War I and the amount of tensions that were in Europe and across the world, okay, I really don't agree with that.
So horrifying that countries don't fight them unless they're backed up against a wall. However, the situation we're seeing is that many countries are in that very situation. Countries are willing to gamble the chances of dying gloriously if they're afraid they're going to die anyway. When people ask me what the world would be like if World War I never happened, I reply that never could have happened. The world order was so fundamentally tilted towards war that if war didn't start with the murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, it would have started somewhere else.
True, and I totally agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. That World War I was basically an inevitability. There were so many times between 1900 and 1914 that war was really avoided. That I totally agree with him on that.
In the decades leading up to World War I, you saw wars nearly break out over the islands off the coast of Germany, Morocco, the Congo, and a few other places. Every time the great powers were able to paper the problem over. But when the world order was that unstable, war had to happen at some point. The world's nowhere near as unstable as it was before World War I, thank God. But we have a similar crisis where we see lots of powder kegs connected around the world waiting for matches to drop on them. We've seen greater war nearly break out many times over the last 2 years, with flashpoints in North Korea, Taiwan, between India and China, over Iran, Turkey, and Ukraine. Every time the great powers have been able to paper things over. However, what happens if we have a major recession that crushes the standard of living or mass riots start breaking out in China? We've already seen the world drift into madness. We've lived through things that our parents in their youth would have viewed as science fiction. Mushy as it sounds, I remember Carl Jung describing the vibe in Europe before the First World War as a palpable frenzy of energy and fear that intoxicated the continent for years before war broke out. The continent got drunk before it fell into barbarism. I think I know that feeling since we're experiencing it today.
Okay, I wouldn't agree.
Much as I painted a horrible and lurid picture of how we might be able to dance to our graves, I think a world war isn't the most likely option. At least not in the same way the world wars we experienced them in the 20th century were.
Okay, good.
The first major point to get across is that we're used to assuming total wars or epic struggles that are waged by entire nations with their whole energies are normal across history. Well, they're really not. We only have 2 eras of total wars across history. The early industrial era from the Napoleonic to World War II, and the 3rd century BC. For the rest of history, you had big wars, but I wouldn't call them total wars. Look at the 100 Years' War, 30 Years' Wars. These were horrible wars that killed millions of people, but they went on for decades with their countries functioning while World War I broke Europe in a 4-year period. The difference was that the military technology of the times meant that war wasn't all or nothing, and so the way you won wars was by trying to get the other side to go bankrupt by dragging out the war as long as possible and hurting their economy indirectly. Large set-piece battles were pretty rare in these wars, with skirmishes and sieges being the most common. The problem we run into with predicting the future of war is that everyone is always wrong. I'm not...
And one thing, too, to just quickly mention is that the 100 Years' War was not fought consecutively over 100 years. Rather, there were large periods, multiple periods, in fact, throughout the 100 Years' War. And the other thing, too, is that the way that the military functioned, right? So having enlisted men, as in we have in our modern times, right? That was not how militaries functioned. Soldiers were sort of mercenaries for hire that countries would pay, right? And obviously funding wars is very expensive when you need to pay basically these mercenaries, else they'll come for you afterwards. So, I mean, the composition of militaries was quite different during the 100 Years' War than it was during World War I. And I think that's something that should be taken into place. Also, Prussia was an interesting example because they actually had a standing army that was a more professional army.
Messing around. Often the smartest people in the world try to predict what will happen in the next war, only to be magnificently wrong.
Just like how people predicted Ukraine would only last a week, and here we are, day 79, I believe.
Actually be just to predict the opposite of what everyone else is doing to get it right. I'm kind of stuck between if the next war will be unimaginably horrifying due to advanced technology, or if technology is descaled war to make it less intensive. It's really impossible to know. The conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East make it look like war has become less intensive, but in both cases, it's militaries that aren't very effective. When we've seen the crack U.S. Army fight in conflicts like Iraq, it's been able to blow conventional opponents out of the water with blitzkrieg precision. A couple factors determine the nature of the next war. The first is how aggressive and/or effective China is. Ukraine was really interesting to see on my part, since I had seen reports both saying the Russians had modernized their military and made it incredibly effective, and those that said their military would be terrible. It's interesting to see that the actual Russian military, as it fielded, undershot expectations. China's very similar, and then I've heard reports of the Chinese Either will be extremely capable and aggressive in a conflict, or corrupt and disaffected.
And this is the thing, and a lot of it came down to the unsexy parts of war, right? That Russia failed at. And again, this is a conflict that's still developing. It's not over, so please. But things like logistics, supply, command and control, all the things that are not the sexy parts, right? The modern equipment, the tanks, and the things that people like talking about. That was really the full, failure so far. Of the Russian military.
The Russian weakness in Ukraine, a conflict I expected the Russians to win in 2 weeks, is a load off one of my paranoid fantasies that the Russians and Chinese deal to coordinate a two-front war over Eurasia. With the Russians no longer being a viable threat to NATO and Europe, that leaves the Chinese alone in the east.
And I mean, look at that map,
in
right? That was just there. I mean, that is just what a fantastic picture to pause on. But that is just a ginormous scale war. Right, and if we're seeing the effects of a two-front war in Ukraine, three-front correction, imagine this, right? Going through Iran into Saudi Arabia, into northern India, down through Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, approaching on South Korea, the Baltics. Like, this is just an insane endeavor that I just do not think is possible. Even if you coordinated these nations. No
longer being a viable...
Also, why is Mongolia but whatever.
...threat to NATO and Europe, that leaves the Chinese alone in the east. In a scenario where the Chinese are a real threat, things get scary. China's 4 times America's population and the largest industrial output of any nation in the world. If they fight well, they'll be unstoppable. However, the other scenario is that China's not unified and isn't effective. In a world like this, China just collapses into civil war without waging an external war. I think this scenario is pretty likely and shouldn't be discounted. China just collapses into riots and rebellions as the government falls apart. If China falls to internal problems and doesn't reform as a powerful totalitarian state, there's no way we have a major war. The free world would have a series of internal social problems, but they're manageable. However, the Chinese are a proud people, and I partially have trouble imagining them go out quietly. There are 2 important mitigating variables that make a legitimate world war less likely. The first being nuclear weapons. Although I think a conventional war could still happen with countries having nuclear weapons in the same way that poison gas was never used in World War II, I think even having them on the table makes world leaders think more carefully about starting major wars.
Absolutely.
This is a huge factor that needs to be emphasized, but it's really impossible to know how huge a factor it is.
Yeah.
The second is that major wars normally happen when there's lots of young people. This is the case for the Napoleonic and World Wars. Most nations today have collapsing youth populations that make war very socially costly. Although I think a world war could easily happen, I don't think it's the most likely option due to these factors.
True. Yeah, some good points in that one.
When you're predicting the future, you're looking at different die roll chances. I think there's a small chance that nothing goes wrong at all. The old world order has been building up to release, and it has to go somewhere. Likewise, I think the chances of an old-style World War II conflict are there, but they're in the minority. I think the most likely option is a conflict like the 30 Years' War. For those that don't know, the 30 Years' War was a conflict fought between basically every country in Europe from 1618 to 1648. This was caused by one of those social collapses I talked about earlier in the video, as practically every nation in Europe waged a war to keep their local social system intact, while also fighting a war with foreign powers. However, due to the underlying issues and stresses of the war, basically every country was fighting a civil war by the end of the conflict. The thing I find compelling at the 30 Years' War is that it's a model that allows a reset in the world system, while I think a world war model doesn't perfectly fit for the present. What seems more in keeping with the spirit of our times? The world wars were fought on the tails of large, earnest young populations mobilized by the recent Industrial Revolution, and I just don't see those factors being there today. In the 30 Years' War, nations fought through proxy by funding allies waging economic war with the others, trying to destroy other countries' societies, while nations themselves were torn by massive class, ideological, political, and social divisions, much like today. If we're using the 30 Years' War as a proxy for a future conflict, it would look like this. Again, the chances of anything you can think of imagining are pretty low, and the chances of something you can't even imagine happening are the highest. But this is a potential scenario that might not even be the most likely scenario, but I think it's a compelling vision for what could happen. Russia conquers Ukraine after a nasty 3-month conflict. China realized...
That means that the conflict is coming to a close a few weeks then.
The time is soon invades Taiwan while the world is busy looking at Europe. America does.
Okay, already, I don't think we can just immediately dismiss what would be the largest naval invasion of all time, just to go, yeah, okay, it happens, right? Something like China invading Taiwan. I don't think that will ever happen. Ever is a long time, but in the foreseeable future, I just don't think that would happen. But let's go along with the theory here.
Directly want to start a conflict with China, so blockades China of oil and all trade through the Straits of Malacca. China cannot survive as a nation without ocean-bearing trade, and so the Chinese attacked U.S. allies like Vietnam and eventually India. The Chinese support North Korean invasion of South Korea. The Chinese get assurances of a Russian invasion of Eastern Europe and NATO, which does not occur. Putin would like to see the Chinese and Americans fight each other to weakness. The conflict isn't a total war. It's a limited one with armies numbering in the millions, but no draft. The advantage lies with the infantry in this conflict, and the Chinese don't fight super effectively, so their armies get bogged down upon attacking their opponents. There are immense social pressures to draft, but all sides are worrying instituting a draft would result in revolts. Countries use social media to pump out lots of propaganda. The internet goes into a war frenzy, and normal people, probably including yourself, have been misled to believe that the war is totally justified and necessary.
Okay, all right. I don't think any government has that much propaganda to think that you could control all of it to say that you would have no resistance. But okay, sure. But I mean, even then, to say just a little thing, just conquering Vietnam, just a little thing. I think the escalation would go way too high before you ever get to that point. I mean, Taiwan, I think, is about the highest escalation. But, if we can say, all right, they'll just do a naval blockade, okay, maybe. But then they're pushing into India, the Chinese, that is, into South Korea. I mean, then it becomes the total war that he was talking about before. So I don't think using this 30-year war example really works within this context, but... All right, let's keep going.
America doesn't technically declare war on China per se, but millions of Americans are fighting in Asia with American allies. The great powers have agreements not to use nukes in case there are no bombings on countries proper. Countries instead use cyber and economic attacks. The Chinese pull out of the dollar system, which results in a global collapse in standard of living. People hate the world and seethe, but governments use wartime laws to prevent dissent. An important factor is...
But then another thing, too, is why? Right? And this is one interesting thing, is like, why would they do it then? The motivation isn't exactly clear, but okay, to just say hypothetically they have the why, but I don't think this is even close to really happening.
That we would see the breakdown of the global agricultural system. And we're seeing this today with a lot of analysts thinking we're going to have famine in much of the world by the end of this year. But the world's agricultural system is very
I'd be curious to read about that.
And so political problems result in mass famine and inability to move fertilizer around and starvation in food insecure countries. And this would just get remarkably terrible if we had a war or political disturbance. With the exception of the United Kingdom, Eastern Europe, and Scandinavia, most of Europe doesn't support America in this conflict. The U.S. pulls troops out of Europe as punishment, and the financial crash hits Europe with radical parties and revolts across the continent. Skirmishes start between...
Why would something like France, Germany, Italy, and those other countries there, why would they not support if there was China invading a sovereign nation? I mean, within the Ukraine crisis, all of Europe is behind Ukraine. So I would not say that they would be anti-American in this case.
Poland and Russia that escalate into a Russian invasion of Poland that fails as Russian soldiers refuse to fight. Russia falls into revolution and civil war. China falls into civil war as the war ends. The Treaty of Tokyo solidifies the
civil war on
the
civil wars.
Order. Far-right candidates are elected into power in India and the U.S., which cause left-wing urban revolts, which are countered by right-wing militias. Finally, with right-wing government...
Whoa. Okay. All right. Now we're... I don't even think I need to comment. That's... All right.
Government's cracking down. The worst possible option is that these countries become military dictatorships. Across Eurasia, we see warlords rise to power as atrocities like genocide against ethnic minorities and conflicts that kill millions.
This sounds like a D&D
We now end up with
campaign.
cascading effects. How do you predict the Vietnam or Korean wars from the death of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand? As conflict begets conflict over the decades, we start to see a new world order establish itself. Whether it's a new caliphate, a Chinese prophet who founds a new religion, and the people who have seen so much horror will start to have families again. People will forget all the big ideas they once
By the way, if you want to check out my video on this map, it's what are the borders of the 23rd century? Check it out.
believed and settle down for order. The biotech industry will usher in a new revolution as the next genre of music comes from the garages of Phoenix, Arizona. Whatifalthist is often called a doomer channel since I predict what will end, but what I can't show you is what will come. If I was in 1914, I could tell you that the age of emperors, traditional religion, and big finance would end, but I wouldn't be able to tell you how jazz, feminism, communism, the movie industry, and affordable cars were all around the corner. I've started feeling nostalgic for this moment in time. I've taken moments to think about how we're in the last moments of our age. I'm savoring drinking a latte while listening to DaBaby and scrolling through Tinder in the same way that I'm sure a nobleman in 1788 savored his beef bourguignon and Rousseau while looking at his big-wigged friends, concealing an inner chuckle that the world that everyone else around him believed to be immortal would pass away like clouds over the mountains.
Okay,
this all
sure,
sounds
that's
pretty
fair.
bad, and
Sure.
it might be, but I'm going to choose to be optimistic, and I look forward to being able to hopefully share this journey with all of you. I take joy in knowing that as this happens, we as a Whatifalthist community might be able to talk, think, and, God willing, possibly alter the events to come in our own little way. Let's get some popcorn. Whatifalthist, and thanks for watching.
Cool. I liked that last message there. I actually think you really saved it there of just to talk, think, right? Think through these ideas, think through these what if possibilities. I disagree with a lot of what he said in there, but I like that because at the end of the day, it's just to think, it's to talk, it's to sort of frame the modern political issues, look at history, see how it can be informed, but then, you know, you can't always put the same model onto what's happening currently from what happened then. So cool video. Again, like I said, disagree with a lot of it, but hey, it's just an opinion, right? It's Whatifalthist. It's just an opinion. So thank you all very much for watching. Check out my other 2 videos on Whatifalthist, which is How Canada Will Fall, which that one I completely disagreed with, and The Borders of the 22nd Century, which was a bit of an interesting one as well. So check out those videos. Please comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Trying to reach 1,000 subscribers and 4K watch hours, which is a lot more than Twitch. And also, if you want to see me on Twitch, see me live streaming, check out the link. I stream on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, and join the Discord if you want to be a part of the community. Suggest videos to watch, and then go from there. So thank you all very much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.